So we're here to talk about validating and optimizing performance. Um, those are big words, and they have lots of syllables. And we'll start talking about how we can do some of those. My name's Keith Parsons. I've been doing Wi-Fi. It seems like for a long time, since before my hair was white. Then again, my hair wasn't this color until after COVID. So I caught COVID and my hair turned white. Has nothing to do with age at all. So this was the marketing blurb that went out about this. The session will cover essential techniques, and it's ideal for everyone. Yeah, marketing is marketing. And then I'm looking at this and saying, well, what can I actually teach that has some value? So you might not get this exact marketing bit, but we're going to cover some good stuff here. Starting with this little picture, and I try to start all my presentations with something like this. If you don't understand every one of these little bubbles, then you should need to go study. There's a lot of places where you can go study and learn more about it. But this is how Wi-Fi works. The red part is the RF part of Wi-Fi, the blue is the LAN, and the green is the WAN, and they all interact. And when someone says Wi-Fi sucks, it could be any one of these bubbles that causes it. And we're here with 7Signal today, and they have tools that help you evaluate and see where these bubbles go. But you'd really need to understand them yourself. And on the top left side, there's a little kind of a pinkish red box around the RF medium. And that portion happens every single frame that gets sent on Wi-Fi. There's a little cycle that goes through there. Every device that has something ready to transmit will wait. We'll find out, is there time when I transmit, and when I do get a slot to transmit, when I transmit, what MCS do I use? And that's true for every single transmission, whether it be from an AP to a client or a client to an AP. It happens all the time. So you probably should understand how it works. So when you go to look at your Wi-Fi and fix a problem, you'll know where the problem exists. Now, for every one of those bubbles, there's some 33 bubbles there. Each one of those bubbles has a series of potential things that could cause it and metrics that we want to look at. 7Signal has tools that'll go and look at these for you. You can look at them yourself as well. So again, learn how it works, and then you'll be much better able to do troubleshooting and planning and optimizing and tuning. If we look just at the bottom part here, this is how an association happens. Now, this isn't every single cycle, like the little RF medium was for every single frame that has to have a transmit, it goes through a little cycle. This is only every time a client wants to join an SSID. And it's going to go through a series of process. The client device may be in a different location. It moves. It then chooses, I want to associate, I'd like to join Wi-Fi. And then it goes through a process and it listens. And there's a little more on the next slide about that. And then it makes a decision of which AP I want to join. And then based on the AP's configuration, it's either open authentication, pre-shared key, or a .1x kind of thing. And at the end of that, they all get to the same place. You get connected to an AP. Now, there's different processes to get there, but in the end, a client is now associated AP. And then I have a grandson who likes telling stories, and in the middle of them, he always stops. And then we get to upper layers. So a DHCP request happens after we've gone through all of the Wi-Fi part. So one of the cool tricks is, if you have an IP address, you don't have a Wi-Fi problem, because the only way you could have possibly got an IP address was over the Wi-Fi. Now, your Wi-Fi might not be doing what you want it to do, but the association process worked. The association process, this slide, if it looks old, it's because it's probably 25 years old, and it hasn't changed in 25 years. The process is still exactly the same. Beacons transmit out 10 times per second per radio per SSID. A client will send out a probe request. APs respond with probe responses, and then the client decides. And by the way, we've been calling it a green diamond in our industry for a long time because of this one sly fact. 25 years ago, I hired a graphic artist to take this information about how it works, and she used a green diamond. Now, green because she already used some other colors, and Diamond because Diamond is a decision on flow charting, and the decision is inside the laptop. You can also notice how old this is. There's a PCMCIA slot on this side of the laptop. So this has been around a long time. Nothing's changed, and the client is going to choose which AP to join, and then it continues on and does the association process. In that association algorithm, there's a whole list of things that the client's going to use to make that decision. Now, depending on the brand, the manufacturer of the client device, it could have one, all, many, more, whole weird combinations. Some clients even use GPS location, as in, where am I right now? And the last time I was at this location, was there an AP that gave me better results than a different one? So I might want to influence that decision with where. I might influence decision with when. If I'm sitting on my couch at 8 p.m. and I hit Netflix, the last known good Netflix AP I associated with was this one. So maybe I should try that one first. So there's a lot of pieces that go into this algorithm of how it works. But when it's all done, we get connected and we're sending data.
Hey, Keith.
Yes.
So sorry to interrupt you. We've got a couple people in the chat saying your audio sounds a bit low. If you could just tweak with that for a second.
Okay. Well, I will get even closer. Is that any better?
I think so. I'll let you know if the chat says anything.
Okay.
Thank you.
This little RF medium one happens for every single frame. There's a contention process. Then there's an MCS process. There's some overhead that 802.11 takes. And I've done if you want to go back and look in the 7-signal webinar series, maybe a year and a half ago, I did one on the entire process of just the overhead. So you can go back and look at that one. Anyway, and then we start sending data. So all of that is just prep work to say, if you understand how all these little pieces work, and here's my favorite, I like MCS because MCS is a self-reporting number. Every transmitter, whether it be AP or client, before every single frame they send, they make this decision. Obviously they want the fastest MCS, but which one am I going to use now based on the current RF conditions right now? And when I say now, I mean down to the thousandth of a second now. This is very dynamic. And so it's self-reporting. If a client is getting a high MCS, they're happy. If you have really high RSSI and they're getting a loud signal from the AP, but they have a low MCS, the client's not happy. It's not only just RSSI. More things go into that. Okay. So in the teaser for why you came here, it was how to optimize. I'm going to give you some hints right here of how to make your Wi-Fi better and how to not have a wireless problem. Now, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have wireless problems? I would love it. And this has come over 20 years of practice. If you don't want to have a wireless problem, don't allow a wired problem on your wireless. Now, how do we stop that? Well, if you look at this list, it shows you have to design in a certain order. Now, not everyone designs this way, or especially when it comes to rollout. But if you roll out in this order, basically the core out to the edge, when you mount the AP, if the rest of your network is up and running, you can use this technique. Works pretty good. So before you install an access point, you want to make sure the wire does everything it needs. Is it a Cat 5 or a Cat, whatever your spec is? Today, we're probably putting in all Cat 6 spec. Is your cable Cat 6? Does it meet the length requirements? Is the PoE on there proper? Are you pulling an IP address? Are you in the right subnet? All these little checkboxes here are what you do before you mount an AP. Amazingly, if you get all this part working properly before you put an AP on, you'd be shocked at how many times you won't have a wireless problem because it's not predicated on a wired problem. So if you can get all these things done first, then you install the access point. Now, I like paying my installers to do all these steps. They're already up there. They're on a ladder. They have their tools with them. So I have them do all those previous steps and document it. And then they install the access point. And then after the access point's installed, they finish the documentation. Of course, you always, nothing's done until the documentation's finished. But sit there and do the rest of these steps to make sure the Wi-Fi coming out of that access point when it was first brand new installed is doing what it's supposed to do. And amazingly, how many problems you won't have in the future if from the very beginning the Wi-Fi is working properly. So first, make sure the wire is working and doing everything it's supposed to. Then make sure the AP is doing what it's supposed to. And then actually use a client, and the installer, while he's up on a ladder, test his client against this AP to make sure it all works. And it's kind of crazy. But if it works once, the chances it's going to work in the future are really, really high. Well, let's talk about coverage validation. First of all, that installer who is putting in the Cat6 cable and pulled it to that spot where the AP is going, he doesn't get paid unless he does a validation on the cable itself. If you paid for Cat6, you want them to give you back a report where they plug in meters and measure this is Cat6 spec cable. Because if it meets the cable once, 5, 10, 15 years, it probably is still good. So we want to do the same thing with Wi-Fi. And I've been beating this drum for over 25 years. It's really sad, but it's not the same with Wi-Fi. People do designs for Wi-Fi, installs for Wi-Fi, and they never stop to validate the Wi-Fi. I know it sounds crazy, but it's still happening that way. So if you don't have a validation survey when you know or don't know, because you really don't know, how do you go about figuring this out? So there's an entire process of doing validation surveys. First, there's different types, and I'm going to call them worst, good, better, best. And yes, I do have opinions. It's amazing. And I'll tell you which ones fit in these categories. But what you want to start with is what data is being collected. When we go out to do a validation survey, what we'd like to collect is what will a client see when they come to this position? I could be, 2 meters to the left of the front door. If someone was standing there in the lobby, what Wi-Fi would they expect to see? Well, since we can't touch, taste, feel, smell, or hear Wi-Fi, we need a tool to help it capture that for us. Now, the best tool would be the tool that the client that you're worried about uses. If it was the CEO and he uses an iPhone 16, well, then I would want to test it with an iPhone 16. Crazy though, you'd want to test it with his iPhone 16 because every iPhone 16 isn't the same. They've been through, if you see my wife's phone, it has dents all over it, been through drops, falls, and they don't actually react the same. So instead of going to a specific iPhone or the CFO's Android phone that they have, or some nurse's voice phone that they're using, since we don't have every single person's device, and by the way, all those devices have a range, we have, as a community in this industry, said, we're going to measure a standard. Now, the standard that we design to when we use a design tool from Ekahau or Hamina or CDOS or NetAlly is something called free space loss. We calculate what's the transmit power from an AP. They push that AP's transmit power through a certain shaped antenna, and then they model that in the room going through walls and distances and attenuation areas and say, if the RF started with a certain transmit power, it went through that specific antenna at this angle, and it had to go through these 3 walls, we predict based on math, the RF at that location will be X RSSI. And then when we go and we're doing this validation survey, we'd like to collect and prove, was that X actually true in the real world? So first we have to understand the process of what's going to be happening here. We need to know what our requirements are. What's my primary signal strength? What's my secondary signal strength? What's my co-channel interference ranges? If you don't know your requirements, then you're kind of like, Alice in Wonderland when she talks to the Cheshire Cat and he's like, where are you going? I don't know. Well, then any road will take you there. It doesn't matter what you collect in your validation survey if you don't have something to measure them against. One of the things I've found most in my career that people don't do is they don't measure the co-channel interference. And that's the killer, because co-channel interference is what takes away from the beautiful MCS values that your clients could have, but they don't get to have because even though you have a good RSSI, it's too crowded and they don't get a time slot, so they can't transmit, and then they have to retransmit, then they lower their data rate, and bad things happen. So measure primary, measure secondary. That's why we want to have something to hand off to if we need to roam for the secondary, but also measure co-channel interference to know whether or not you have too much interference. One of the easy solutions is to just turn up the power everywhere. One, you get green in your validation surveys, but you're also increasing your co-channel interference and thus lowering the capacity of your network. Same thing happens when you have too many APs. People, well, I say they're people, but salespeople, that has the word people in it. Salespeople like to sell more APs than you might need because they get a commission on them. I understand. That doesn't mean you have to buy what they recommend. You can have too many APs. So let's move on. What are the collection devices we can look at? Well, we could have just a laptop. In the old days, we just carried a laptop. Now, there's a downside to a laptop. Well, there's also some pluses. They're big. We use survey trays to hold them because they're heavy. But the real downside when it came to collecting data for a validation survey was that they only had one NIC. Okay, yes, I know you've all seen Jerry Ola's laptop with 12 NICs hanging on the outside. And we went through Robert Boardman's little 3D printed clips where we could carry 2, 3, or 4 NICs on our laptops. But the downside was it just had a single NIC. And that NIC wasn't consistent. It was just happened to be the one I had. Now, I've done tests on my NICs that I've used for surveys in the past and seen up to a 10 dB differential between they looked the same, but different MAC addresses had up to 10 dB differential. So yeah, we probably didn't want to go that way. We could use a WLAN PI, and I love WLAN PIs, but they also only have one NIC. Then we could go to one of these other tools, a Osmium Hamana Nomad. It has 4 radios, and each of those radios have tri-band. So I could be on any one of 2, 4, 5, or 6 and be collecting 4 at a time. The CDOS Wave has 3 radios that can collect on up to 3 radios simultaneously. The NetAlla AirCheck has 2 radios, and so they can be collecting. One can be on 2.4 and one can be on 5 and collecting at the same time. A Echo Sidekick, like the Nomad, has 4 radios. They're all 3-band, so they can collect data all the time. Now, the reason you'd want to use one of these professional level tools is not only do they collect multiple channels at the same time, they've been designed and made and manufactured with the same specs. So they will be internally consistent. My Nomad will be my Nomad every time I take it out. It might not match your Nomad every time, but it will be consistent for me. So we'd like to have consistent data. When we collect with these, we want to collect as much data as possible, thus the multiple radios. The reason we want to collect a lot of data is it allows us to walk faster and to get more data points. And as you'll see in a minute, we'll talk about why more data points matter. So back to the premise, the beginning thought. You need to understand what you're collecting when you're collecting the data. 1, how many radios to have. 2, what channels to scan. Now, if I don't have anything in my network, let's say I'm doing a 2.4, it's a simple example. Channels 1 through 13. I don't live in Japan, so I don't have channel 13. Maybe I only have channel 11. I'm in the US. And of those 1 through 11, I'm not going to use the overlapping channels because they cause too much co-channel adjacent channel interference. So I will just be on 1, 6, 11. Well, if I want to scan really fast and collect lots of data, I will only tell my collector to scan 1, 6, 11, 1, 6, 11, 1, 6, 11. And if I have a dwell time, that's how long I want to sit on a frequency. Now, I'd like to sit on a frequency at least amount of time to hear a beacon. And beacons go out every 1/10 of a second, approximately. So if I can sit over a 1/10 of a second, maybe 105 milliseconds, I'm long enough to be guaranteed if I dwell on a certain channel, I will hear beacons while I'm there. So I set a dwell time, I set a channel, and if I only set 1, 6, and 11, I can get 3 sets of 2.4 gig data every second. So no matter how fast I walk, I'm collecting lots and lots of data and getting really good data as I'm walking and collecting. So channels, one important piece is if you're not using that channel, don't waste the time scanning it. Well, we've come to a point now in time where the vendors who are making these multi-radio collectors, Cedos Wave, Hominas, Nomad, Echo House Sidekick, they have their own algorithms and they have enough radios that they're collecting fast enough. You really don't have to slow down and pull out channels you don't want, but you still can. Now, the question is, how do we save the data? The data is collected that comes in for the radio, is listening to beacons and probe responses, and we hear BSSIDs and we get RSSI, the received signal strength indicator that we get from each of these APs, and we collect all that data. But what do we do with it? Now, here's the big issue of why validation surveys and why the whole presentation today and the tips I'm going to show you. The device knows what was collected, and it has a lot of what's. RSSI, co-channel interference, BSSIDs, what channels were supported, all of the informational elements that were in the beacon, they're all collected. But what's missing is it doesn't know where to save those. You, the human, you're the one who knows where you are. Well, hopefully you know where you are. That's why you're out walking around and you have a floor plan, and your job during that survey is to tell the computer, I am now here. That's your only job. So when you click, you're telling the computer that I am at this specific XY coordinate on this specific floor plan. And then take the data that was collected and save it with that XY coordinate. Then later, when we're evaluating the data, the software will take the XY coordinates with the data that was saved there and then build heat maps accordingly. So you know where you are. The computer knows what was collected. The link to tie the two of you together is that XY coordinate. And the value, see, I'll say this slow. The value and the quality of your validation survey is about how close those XY coordinates, the dots you save data, how close together they are. If they're really far apart, then you have a lot of extrapolation going in between those saved data points. If they're really close together, then the software doesn't have to make up the interpolation in between as much. So how are we going to do this, collecting and attaching the XY coordinate of where the human is to where the data was collected? There's two big types, and I'll go through them both. The first is stop and go. In a stop and go survey, you do not collect data when you walk. You're basically telling the NICs, throw away all the data. So as you're walking between your data points, you're collecting data and you're just flushing it out, the buffers, they just get emptied. So the only time you save data is when you go to a spot, you stand there, you look at the map and you say, I am here. And when you click, it starts the data collection. The 3 or 4 radios start scanning the channels. They collect all of their data. And depending on which software you're running, there might be a little clock that counts down. And as it cycles through and gets all the radio, all the channels, all the data, it then stops and saves all of those data points with the XY coordinate of where you were. And then it stops collecting data. The word stop and go, the stop is about collecting data. The go is about the person walking. As you walk, there is no data. Now, I think this is totally stupid because why am I walking and throwing away all this valuable data that was collected as I was walking along, but we didn't want it because I didn't want to learn how to click properly. So stop and goes are for lazy people. Yes, I said it. They're for people who are, and by the way, it's really easy to do a stop and go survey. I can probably teach someone to do it in less than 2 minutes. I have my grandkids do it. It's go someplace, find yourself on the map, don't move, just click, and then go someplace else. Ta-da, that's all it is. It's very fast, it's very easy, but what it doesn't do is collect good data in between the spots. The data you collect at the spot, fantastic. The data in between the spot, totally thrown away. So the quality of the survey you receive on a stop and go is limited to the number of stop and goes you do. And each stop and go takes time. So it's kind of a trade-off between, do I want my worker to spend a lot of time collecting lots of data points to stop and go, or should I train them how to do a better one called a continuous survey? In a continuous survey, the Wi-Fi NICs, one, two, three, or four, however many you have in your collection device, will continue to collect data all the time. 1611, 1611, 1611. Or if they're in 6 gig, they'll scan all the 6 gig channels or the 5 gig channels. And all the radios are collecting data all the time, and they have no XY coordinate. They don't know where they go. So they just save them into buffers. Every time they get a full set from all the radios on all the channels, they save all that data into a buffer. It doesn't matter what it's called. It's just saved, but it doesn't have an XY coordinate. So it's not valuable yet. It's just has the potential to be valuable. And so as you're walking, it saves the data, it saves the data, it saves the data, but you have not told the computer where you are. So what you have to do is click when you start, and that puts the first anchor. And then as you're walking, the data is being collected, the data is being collected. And then the second time you click, the computer says, well, you were there at point 1, you're here at this point at point 2. We know the first buffer gets saved at the first one, the last buffer gets saved at the last one, and then it does math, and it says you walked 100 meters. It took 10 seconds. So let's go back on the line from point 1 to point 2 and move 10 meters along the line and save with the XY coordinate the first buffer, then the second buffer, then the third buffer. And it dumps the buffers back along that line. That's how the data in a continuous survey is collected and saved. If you understand that, it's now your job to help the tool do its job properly. And that's what I'm going to show you on the next slide. There's also some other people have come up with some hybrid or line versions, and I'm not even going to waste time on those. They're halfway in between a stop and go and a continuous. You throw away some of your data, but you keep some of your data. I would just recommend learn to do a continuous right and properly, and you'll get the most data, the highest accuracy, and take the least amount of time. So one other term, passive versus active. And this is where I'm going to get the term worst survey, has to do with active. Now, I fell in love with active surveys 20 years ago when Air Magnet had one, and I believed the marketing hype, and they're like, isn't it so much better? We do an active survey and we actually ping and we get collected real data. It's not just RSSI, we're getting throughput. And the problem was, and it took me probably over a year to learn this, when you're doing an active survey, you're only collecting one access point, because we took a real live client, we associated to the real live AP like I should have, and I'm sending data from my client to that AP, and it's fantastic data, but I'm only getting it from one AP. That's it. So to do a good active survey, I have to do an active survey around AP1, all the way to the edge of where it stops and back in every direction from the AP. And then I associate to AP2 and I do an active survey around AP2. And then I go to AP3 and I have to start and do the active survey all over again. So yes, active surveys can be fantastic. I love them, but I never do them because my customers aren't willing to pay the cost it takes to do a survey around each and every single access point. So what happens is you do the bad thing at the bottom. Cross the streams. Lazy people turn on active with one NIC and collect passively with another NIC. Yay! Now we get all the data from all the passive surveys, and then we overlay it with the active survey from one AP. And then we show our customer this picture that they think is active surveys everywhere, but it's only a single AP's worth of active survey. All the other data is still passive. It's made up. So don't mix them. Either do all actives and do them correctly to the edge of every single cell in every single direction. That's a fantastic active survey. Or do a passive. But when you mix them together, The data that's collected is flawed, majorly flawed. And by the way, what you're really collecting at that point is you're collecting where the client roamed, the active client. So every time you roam, you'll get a dead spot in your active survey every time. And now you're showing to your customer, this is not a bad place because that just happens to be where you roamed. That doesn't mean it's a bad Wi-Fi there. I roamed there. And if you did an active survey and walked anti-clockwise, those bad spots that looked bad because active survey failed are in a totally different place. Every time you do an active survey, the bad places move, which tells you it's not really showing you bad places. It's just showing you roaming. Okay. Tips for walking and clicking. I'll come back to the pineapple in a minute. So why are you clicking? Well, the clicking's job is to me tell the computer where the collection device is. Now, not where my feet are, where the collection device is. So if I'm holding in front of me, when I click on the map, I want to click where the handset is. If I've got my collection device on my hip, it's where my hip was at that time. So you're clicking where the device was at a certain point in time, and you're telling it, save the buffer here. In order to help the software do its job properly, just follow these 3 simple rules. They're really simple. And I'm really sad that COVID happened and we stopped going and doing on-site trainings. I've trained over 10,000 people how to do this thing. And when I do it live in person and I walk with them and they go around the room, they learn it really quickly. When you try to teach it over Zoom, I don't think it works as well. So here's the rules. You click when you start. So you're standing still, you start the survey, and you're saying that first set of data started here, X, Y. Boop. Then you start walking. If you turn, click, because you're going to put an anchor point down because you know that the software is going to collect all the buffers and save them on a line between point 1 and point 2. Well, if you turn and you don't click when you turn, you're going to get the angle wrong. The line's going to be incorrect. So click when you start, click when you stop. If you stop and you're talking to someone, that's fine. All the data that's still being collected is being collected. And as long as you click when you start, all the collected data saves at the exact same XY coordinate and you're fine. So you could pause, but you don't have to. You just click when you start, click when you stop, and then click every time you turn. That's it. Walk, click, turn, walk, click, turn, walk, click, turn. Every time there's a turn, you click. Every time you stop, you click. Every time you start, you click. That's all you need to do. And just an aside, we all know you didn't actually walk through a wall. So when you're walking and clicking, don't walk through walls. You physically didn't do it, so we know. Now, the reason I have the pineapple up there is another tip, another trick I learned from a 10-year-old boy in Hawaii. There was a bunch of families. We all went to Hawaii together. We stopped at the Dole Pineapple Plantation. The kids had been in the car all morning. We probably had 12 kids between the 3 families, and they were rambunctious. And I said, I will give everyone a Dole Whip, this wonderful, sweet, cold, beautiful dessert, if you get through the maze. And I thought, as an adult, I'm going to send these kids into this maze and I'll have time to have my own Dole Whip and wait. And they all go running in, and I hadn't even finished my dessert. And along comes this little 10-year-old kid. And he comes up and says, can I have one? Can I have one? And he's all excited. I'm like, how did you get here so fast? And he looks at me and he's like, you're an adult. You don't know the maze trick? And sadly, I did not know the maze trick. And he's like, I can finish any maze faster than anyone. And I'm looking at this little 10-year-old kid, and he was not the smartest one of the kids. So I'm like, how did he know this trick? And he tells me it's really simple. His grandpa had told him, you're not smart enough to really know how to get out of the maze because they're done by really smart people. But if you put your hand on one side of the wall and you never let go, you will always get out of a maze. So he just got into the maze, grabbed a wall, and ran the entire way through. And it's just math. And anyone who's taken math with mazes and anyway, high math stuff, It's true if you just drag your hand on the wall. So here's the tip for doing surveys. When I'm looking at my floor plan, and sometimes they're confusing, you look around the room and you don't know exactly where you are on the map. Here's the tip. Every time you get to a door, turn right. Just you might be looking at the map saying, I want to go over there, but hold off. Just every time you get to a door, if you go in through the door, go to the right. Go around the room. When you come back out to the hall, turn right. Go to the next door, turn right. It's like dragging your hand on the wall. You will finish the entire floor plan eventually if you always make those right turns. Now, you could do left as well. I'm just happen to be right-handed, and I use my right hand for doing my clicky part, so it's easier for me to do that. But just pick something. I know there's this temptation when you go into a room and you see it and you, oh, I want to go over to that corner. I want to go to this corner. Trust me, you will get all the corners if you just drag yourself around and taking right turns only. So one last little bit here on taking better validation surveys. We want to think outside in, not inside out. Now, what I mean by that is if I want to figure out the coverage of RF in a room, I'll want to go around the inside perimeter of that room. Yes, I could go to the center of the room and click, and I know free space loss is going to guess to the edges. But if I'm walking and I do the perimeter, and in the next room, I do the perimeter, now I have data collection points on both sides of that wall. What I care about is how thick that wall is. One, so I can do predictive surveys in the future. Another, I want to know because it's really the wall that where the RF loss is happening. Inside the room, it's free space loss. If I only go to the center of the room and I do free space loss, the distance between the center of room 1 and the center of room 2, if there is a 10 dB wall in between, that 10 dB wall gets spread in the software between those 2 points. If I walk on 2 sides of a wall and that's the same 10 dB wall, when I go plot that in the software, it doesn't have to extrapolate and mix a wall with free space. So go on the outside. You also don't need to do every room. You may, but there's many times you don't have to if you have enough data. Don't cheat, as in don't go. I had some surveys that I was evaluating where someone went to the front lobby, did not move, and I know they didn't move because the data didn't change. And then they clicked in all the rooms all around, and they also looked like they walked through walls, and came back and said, look, it's all green. Think of your surveys as dual entry accounting. The reason we have dual entry accounting is to keep people from cheating. Don't cheat. Collect really good data. Now, green does not mean good. I know there's marketing people out there who like to show beautiful colors because it looks so much better to have green and a yellow and a red. The numbers are nothing more than a graphical representation of a number. In the software, you say, I want neg 65 to be this color. That's it. All you're doing is assigning a number to a color. So when we see the color, we think of a number. Well, if I want to cheat a lot, I will say anything better than neg 80 is green. And the place will look fantastic, but it won't actually work. So use the RSSI values that meet your requirements. And if you know your requirements before you do the validation survey, as you're collecting them, you'll get even better data. Yeah, which leads to this. What if you don't have a validation survey? And many times we don't. So that's my lead in to Eric. But before we drop off to Eric, Heather, you want to see if we have any questions?
Yes. And we've got one in the chat. We've got a couple on CCI. So Neil's asking if we can drill down into measuring CCI a little bit, specifically the accuracy of Ekahau's CCI slider, which metrics to use, is it accurate, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe that's a good start.
I won't make any comments on any one vendor's software. I'll just talk to CCI in general. CCI is when you have one or more APs on the same channel at the same location. In practice, I like to use 2 or more APs that have a RSSI greater than 85. I know in my head, and I know following the actual protocol, it goes down to 4 dB above the noise floor, but I don't want to think that hard. So I just set mine at 85. So anytime I see 82 or more APs greater than 85, I treat that as a potential for co-channel interference. It's not the true actually, because If at this location where I'm standing, that AP isn't my primary and it isn't my secondary, the chances that a customer's client device will be using that tertiary or the fourth loudest are pretty low. So if I have two APs that are in an area and they're greater than neg 85, they would possibly cause co-channel interference. But I don't treat it as co-channel interference because at that location, they're not a primary or secondary. So I personally, I wish the vendors who are doing these would set a co-channel interference threshold that says, if it's not primary, it's not secondary, don't count the co-channel interference. And I think that's what you're alluding to in the slider. Some of the vendors who are in this validation space try to help you so it doesn't look like co-channel interference is terrible, because co-channel interference is everywhere. So treat co-channel interference carefully. Think about it when you're looking at it. If it's a third or a fourth or a fifth level down AP that's causing it, yeah, it's still there. It's a potential, but it probably won't be causing that issue.
Well, speaking of co-channel interference, we've got a question here in the chat. Oh, I just lost it. Where'd it go? There we go. Asking how to calculate co-channel interference across stacked floors.
No different than when you're on the same floor. It's the exact same thing. If I have two or more APs that can see each other on the same channel, they have the potential to interfere. In reality, it's actually worse than that, because if I have a client, there's two APs and they're on the same floor, or it doesn't matter if they're above or they can see each other, and I'm right in the middle and I'm associated to one. Well, when my client transmits, it transmits even further. So it can cause co-channel interference even farther. I've done testing where I can have two iPhones talk to each other over 150 meters away from each other and send decent data. So 150 meters in clear space with two iPhones, the iPhones are causing the interference. So it's not just AP to AP, but as infrastructure guys, we kind of are tied into the infrastructure side of it. But co-channel interference in large venues is a whole other issue to look at.
Yep. All right. So we've got one, how to handle sticky clients and how do you mitigate them? It's a big question.
Wow, that is a big question. So one, what is a sticky client? A sticky client is a client that associates to one AP and walks past another AP or two or three and is still associated to AP number one. That's not bad in the sense that they're still associated. They can still send data, but they're probably sending data really slow because they're far away from the original AP. And had they roamed to a closer AP, they would be getting faster data. So not only are they getting slow data, they're causing other people to have slow data as well, because they're now next to an AP where they should be talking fast and using less airtime. So the sticky client is, back to the very beginning, the little green diamond, it is 100% in the realm of the client's choice. So one, make sure that the client has the latest and greatest drivers. Two, when it comes to designing your Wi-Fi, think about what your clients are doing and you can design your Wi-Fi appropriately. Let's say we're designing for iPads, and I'm just going to make this number up off the top of my head. An iPad will not roam if it has a signal greater than neg 70. So if I have school and I put APs in the hallways, and inside the hallway they have a really loud signal, a client will be in the hallway, they'll be associated to the hallway AP, and they'll walk 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 doors down, and they'll still be associated to that AP. Instead, I'm going to put my APs in the classrooms, have no APs in the hallway. So when the client leaves classroom 1 on their way to classroom 2, they get to a hallway and it has no signal greater than neg 70, which forces a roam. And since there's no one for them to join in the hallways, then they'll roam when they get to the next classroom. So that sticky client shouldn't stay stuck because we're helping it by having more dead zones. I mean, I'm designing in that into my network. Now, if I did that and then you said, but we need coverage, really good coverage in the halls, well, then you just broke that problem. So you have to determine what you're looking at. So one, fix the client. Two, give the client what it wants. So find out what the client desires and design your network to help it. The other is something that works really well, bounce the client. Teach your people that if I'm having trouble, if it's an iOS device, you just go into airplane mode and off, or you turn on and off your Wi-Fi, and that starts that cycle, and that client will start with a fresh view and most likely rejoin the same AP, the AP that it should be, that's in the best location for it.